There's a lull in proceedings. It's a perfect time to start, I think. So if everyone is ready, I think no one's locked outside, Joe. That was how we started the evening. We set this up beautifully, and we're sitting in here and the doors were locked out there. No one could get in. So it would have been an interesting evening, but we solved that with the help of the university. Thanks so much for coming this evening, everyone. I'm Ross Hampton. I'm the Chief Executive of our National Forest Products Association, and also for the time being your de facto South Australian branch leader as well, because we're going to fill that role permanently after the election. But we've been putting together a plan to talk about this current election. We're delighted that you've been able to join us for this evening's candidates debate. And we've got some very special things that are going to happen this evening over the next hour and a half or so that we're together, and I think it'll be an enjoyable night, an informative night, and I hope everyone, including the candidates get quite a lot out of it. I'll come to introductions properly for our candidates in a moment, because these are our VIPs after all for the evening, but let me just say off the top that I'd like to acknowledge in the room that we have Senator Anne Ruston, our Federal Assistant Minister for Agriculture and Water Resources, somewhere there. We have Tony Passon, the Federal Local Member for this part of the world for Barker. There he is over there. We've got the Liberal Shadow Minister for Agriculture, Primary Industries, Food, Wine, Forests, that's the only bit I should have said really, and Fisheries, David Ridgway, who's here somewhere. Thanks, David. Mayor Richard Sage, District Council of Grand. Thank you, Richard. Where are you? And Richard, you are, I think, Wood Encouragement Policy Council, just as a by the by. That's going to come up a little later. So if anyone wants to know about that later, talk to Richard. Mayor Andrew Lee, did you make it, City of Mount Gambier? Thank you, Andrew, for being here. Councillor Ian Von Stanky from Mount Gambier. Make it yet? There, thank you. McKillop candidates, Tracy Hill from SA Best. Thanks, Tracy. You're a candidate. Put your hand right up. That's the way. Nick McBride, there he is, from the Liberal Party, from just across the way. And of course, although we're a Mount Gambier candidates debate tonight, a lot of this is about those two electorates. Brad Coates, where's Brad? CFMEU representative, and he's for the Greater Green Triangle. So like me, he has a lot more to do with the whole Green Triangle. We're talking about half the Green Triangle tonight though, so we'll bear that in mind. And we've got lots of South Australian industry leaders here, which we won't try to go through, but thank you all so much for giving up precious time to be here. I want to thank UniSA, who provided this great venue. This is the Bob and Gail Cowan Auditorium, as Bob likes to call it, my auditorium. Good on you, Bob and Gail. Thank you so much for all you do. How many scholarships has the foundation provided now? It's more than 700, isn't it? 12 and 1300. My figures were way out of date. So thanks for being here. Also doing that, one of those things that bands sometimes do. We're broadcasting to the world here, so just wave at the camera. There's one up there and one up there. Wave. This is live, okay, on Facebook, which means you'll be able to look back at yourselves later on, and also at the candidates, and you'll be able to check those questions. So thanks to the team who've put that onto Facebook. What we're going to do tonight is talk about forest industries, really only forest industries in this part of the world. There is a lot of election going on up here. I don't know if anyone's noticed. There's an awful lot of election and democracy taking place in this part of the world, and there'll be many opportunities for you to talk about other things that are important to this area. But what we want to do is talk about forestry and forest industries, and we're really pleased that our candidates have come here tonight. I'm coming to an introduction for them, but first of all, an introduction to that idea. Why would we do such a thing? Well, the reason we wanted to do that was because of all the parts of Australia, the Greater Green Triangle area, which Brad looks after, which covers, we're in about half of it here, that area is we have to say, it can't be said there's any bigger area for forestry in 2018 than that area in Australia in terms of its economic value. So what happens here matters to the whole nation, and it certainly matters to South Australia. And we knew intimately that was the case. Our members employ vast numbers of South Australians in the southeast. So we did a poll, as you know. I'm sure many of you would have read it in the Border Watch, and we had an ask of just how many people thought that forestry would be important in this election, of forest industries. As you all would probably know, about 3 or 4 out of every 10 people in Mount Gambier rely in some way on forest industries to get food on the table every week. What surprised us, though, was that 9 out of 10 people in these electorates, particularly Mount Gambier, think that forest industries underpin the economic well-being of the whole area. And this is the bit we really loved and the bit which has caused us to have some really candid conversations with our candidates, and that was 69%. 7 out of 10 people in this electorate want to back a candidate in the election that's going to back forest industries to grow. So that was a great result for us to work with, and that's why we wanted to have this debate, because after all, it takes 2 to tango in democracy, as you know. You've got to have partners. These people and these people have got to come together, and it's going to be interesting to see where we get to tonight in terms of how you feel about the candidates, which brings me to this. So the election has started. Here tonight, I know I'm doing radio tomorrow. I know one of the things Selena's going to ask me on the ABC is who do you think won the debate? And I'm going to say, well, the audience response was X. So there's a box over there. There's a little card here for you to put the person who you think best answered from your satisfaction, from your point of view, the questions tonight. Now, this is the most important thing, I think. I want to say thank you and congratulations to the candidates. Before we even start, and I'm going to give them one of these to thank them. This little pin, little lapel pin, and it's up on the screen there. It says, I support sustainable forest industries. And these are what we give to our very, very special friends in the forest industries, because, you know, this isn't easy what these folks are doing. It really isn't easy at all to put yourself up for public scrutiny and potentially facing voters at an election. So before we start, and no matter how willing and vigorous this all gets this evening, I just wanted to start with us saying thank you and giving them a round of applause for doing what they're doing. Important. And the other thing I wanted to do is say, look, thank you to all of you, because as I said earlier, it does take 2 to do this democracy dance, and it's very easy in Australia to take these things for granted and just hope you get a good outcome for your community in an election. But being here tonight and engaging in the process and asking hard questions, they all want hard questions, that's why they're on the stage, is what it takes to get the best result for our community. How are we going to operate tonight? Oh, I should say I've got 2 more very special guests I've got to introduce. Leon Radmeyer is here, and also Alan Richardson. Leon, I'm sure many of you would already know from the Border Watch, and also Alan, who many of you would know, former days at the ABC and now the acting chair of the RDA Limestone Coast. So they've very kindly agreed to join me in a kind of interrogation from the side role. They're not supposed to be the 2 Muppets up in the wings, although that would be tempting to operate it that way, just saying rubbish every second word, but get him off or her off. But we won't do that, candidates. No, they're going to be sage counsel. They're going to be wise and incisive and deliberate, but they are allowed to be cheeky at times. What they're going to do, though, is they've got a question mark. They're going to hold that up, and that'll allow me to see that there is a question to be asked of a candidate. As you know, because you've got it on your seat, but you've also probably seen it in the newspaper and heard about it on the radio, we have this document which the industry broadly decided, and you can see the industry inside the front cover, most of the industry in our part of the world decided that these were the best things to call out for specific action. There's 10 building blocks for growth there. It's not going to be possible tonight to traverse each one of those individual items. We are going to ask the candidates quite specifically about each one of those building blocks, and before March the 17th, you'll have information from us saying how those responses have gone. But what we will do tonight is bundle the items together. We'll just go through a range of questions, about 5, which are essentially a bundled group, and allow the candidates to respond to it. The only other thing I do need to say before we get stuck into the debate is to say, look, I have an apology also from 2 candidates. Lance Jones, Dignity for Disability, couldn't be here tonight, and also Isabel Scriven, the Labor Party candidate, unfortunately can't be here tonight, but Isabel very kindly sent a statement over later today, and it's over there on the table next to the ballot box, so please grab one of those from Isabel. Sarah over here is going to be our gentle but firm moderator of time, just so we have some sense of where things are going. We're going to start with 2-minute opening statements, and then when we get into questions again, we've got a 2-minute limit, just so we can try to keep the plan to order. But candidates, I do assure you that should you be halfway through a sentence announcing a $200 million plan for roads for this region, Sarah will restrain herself. So there is some to and fro. Audience members, you do also get to participate if you'd like to. But the only rules I've really got tonight are make it cordial and courteous, and it's got to be on subject. That doesn't necessarily mean specifically answering whatever the candidate is saying, but I mean, don't ask something that's not involved with the forest industry, because we're in the wrong forum for that. There'll be other chances for that. This is a forest industry forum. And so if you could indicate, just put your hand up or whatever, if you've got something you'd like to intervene with, I will grab the candidates and grab your question and see if you can ask them as they go. What we'll try to avoid as much as possible, in debates like this, you often get, I've got a question for all candidates, and then we'd have to go through 2 minutes, 2 minutes, 2 minutes, 2 minutes again. So if you have to do that, by all means, we'll give it a crack, but try to keep it more specific if we can. So that's how it's going to work. We're going to get stuck into it now, and we're going to start with our candidates' opening statements. What we'll do, though, is we'll start up this end, and then we'll go to the first question to Kate. What I'm going to try to do is keep it moving through the team over here so that we don't feel like we're going to the same person all the time. But we might start from this end for opening statements. And as I say, Troy, what are you after this one? No, there is a microphone there. I think it's probably easiest if you stay in your places, just make sure the mic is on. It should be showing green.
Hello.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I haven't really introduced you. Sorry, I zipped past that. I just said how valuable you were, and then I didn't say who you were. I think everyone knows who we've got here, but I'm going to say it anyway. Obviously, this Troy Bell, independent and member for Mount Gambier. Next to him is Craig Marsh of the Liberal Party. Next to him, Greg Bissett, Australian Conservatives. And of course, up the end there, Kate Amoroso, South Australia Best, or SA Best, of course, don't we say? Troy, thanks very much.
Thank you very much, and I'd like to thank everybody for coming out tonight. It's a true indication of how valuable this industry is to our region. I'd also like to thank AFPA for putting together a document that guides all parties when formulating their forestry policy, if they haven't already done so. Obviously, the forest industry is a major contributor to our way of life down here, both economic and employment opportunities. And the ongoing viability of the forest sector is paramount. Forestry contributes $2.8 billion to the South Australian economy each year and employs more than 13,000 people, both directly and indirectly. A condition of my support for either party to form government will be the implementation of 4 key elements from my forestry policy, which I released yesterday. These include biomass feasibility study, the establishment of a $1 million grant to be partnered with a commercial operator to undertake a thorough feasibility study into the establishment of biomass in the southeast of South Australia, a biomass investment fund, a $20 million fund, as highlighted in the Australian Forest Products Association building blocks for growth, to partner with a commercial developer to attract private sector investment in the establishment of a biomass facility. An independent auditor. The establishment of an independent auditor to give the community assurance that the conditions of the forward sale of the state forests are being complied with. A commitment to grow domestic timber manufacturing in the southeast. This is a commitment to reducing log exports. A support for a national ombudsman to grow domestic manufacturing, and a commitment to a South Australian target of doubling the economic value of the domestic timber manufacturing sector by 2050, with a focus on regional South Australia. We really do need a domestic manufacturing first policy with the aim of contributing to the South Australian target. Also, the commitment of $250,000 to investigate impediments to the growth of the domestic timber manufacturing. And I think one of the main ways that this can be done is also the review of the implementation of initiatives identified by the Cellulose Fibre Initiative study undertaken by the VTT Technical Resource Centre, which cost $1 million to do, and it's just basically sitting on a shelf. So they are my commitments going forward. I'll be looking to partner with the industry. That is not the entirety of the commitments, but they are my non-negotiables. I'm looking to partner with the forest sector, a sector that employs a lot of people in this region that I want to see have a bright future. And we need to look at a domestic policy first for our local produce that's sitting here. But when I go into the biomass stuff a little bit later, you'll see the true unleashing of potential in this region, and I think it's a game changer for the southeast and something I'm very excited by. Thank you.
Thanks, Troy. Craig.
Thank you, Ross, and thank you, AFPA, for putting this on for Mount Gambier. Good evening, everybody. My name's Craig Marsh. I'm the Liberal candidate for Mount Gambier, and I'd like to be the member for Mount Gambier because I'd like to see many things change. The region is a great place to live and work, but after many years of neglect, it's time to see improvements to all our daily lives. There's no reason for us in the regions to have inferior services and facilities compared to our city counterparts. I'm realistic. I know there's no unlimited supply of money at the government's disposal, and I won't be making any promises I can't keep just to win at this election. However, a lot more can be done for our region and for the forest industry in particular. And I will promise to fight hard to stand up for regional jobs and domestic manufacturing. AFPA's document, Building Blocks for Growth, highlights areas of concern and critical issues that need addressing. The Liberal Party has developed a regional growth fund to inject $150 million over the next 10 years, which will create jobs, unlock economic activity, and provide mechanisms for developing forestry plantations. We want to see a doubling of the economic value of the domestic timber manufacturing sector by 2050. We will work with the industry to arrive at an appropriate structure and representation for the South Australian Forestry Council. The Council will consult with stakeholders and offer recommendations to government regarding measures to expand the plantations and grow domestic timber manufacturing in South Australia. Our royalties for region policy will ensure better, safer infrastructure with a dedicated regional roads and infrastructure fund. This will ensure the delivery of key improvements and other productivity and safety enhancing projects. I'm confident that myself, the Liberal Party and AFPA SA can work effectively together to realise a stronger forestry industry sector for South Australia.
Thanks, Craig. Greg.
My name's Greg Bissett. I'm the candidate for Australian Conservatives. We're a new party, obviously amalgamated with Family First. I'm pleased to be here tonight, and thank you very much for the invitation. I thank you for the plan that's before us. I'd like to state that at the launch in Adelaide, Robert Brokenshire was the only party leader that was actually in attendance. So you can see the commitment that the Conservatives have to the forestry plan. We all understand, us that live here in the southeast, the importance of the forestry industry, and probably we'll also all acknowledge that there's so much more that can be done in terms of value adding that product. And so that needs to change. Our industry has changed dramatically. I can remember coming down here in the 80s and all I could hear was chainsaws everywhere and a lot of men working in the forest. Obviously that's declined, but we need to get those workforce numbers back up, and the best way to do that is to actually value add to the products and ensure that we capitalise not only on the timber as a finished product, but on the waste products with biomass and energy capture. So I thank you for putting the plan together. Robert and myself have been speaking about it yesterday in the car in detail. The Australian Conservatives will launch in week 3 a comprehensive forestry plan, so which will outline every one of and address every one of those issues. And we also believe we don't just need a plan, we need to get the government back on the bus with the forestry industry. And by doing that, not only have a plan, but have a charter so that that's legislated and so that we know what direction we're heading with our forestry industry, not just this election, but into the elections to come. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. Kate.
Thanks, Ross. Good evening, everyone, and thanks for everyone for coming out. First and foremost, I'd just like to say thank you to AFPA for holding this very important debate in our region and putting together such a great document. Secondly, I would like to thank my community for this incredible honour and opportunity for even being up here. I feel very both humbled and honoured to be here. The love and support I've received has been completely overwhelming. Many of you know me as Kate Amoroso, the anti-drug campaigner, and I have to say, when I first spoke to Nick about running for the election, one of the things Nick absolutely hammered was forestry. So yeah, Nick is very strong on this. But here tonight, I want you all to know that I'm very much more than that. Over the past few years, I've actively been involved in this wonderful community on many different levels. I've seen so many people who need assistance, who need representation and need to feel that they matter. In the past few years, we seem to have fallen off the map to the people in Adelaide. I especially want to see our forestry industry revived, which people in the industry tell me that this is more than achievable. This involves making forestry jobs attractive to young people in need of work so they can find a career path in the industry and have job security here too. The new $6 million Forestry Research and Development Hub at UniSA Mount Gambier campus will help us to do this. It will also support our region's $1.2 billion forest industry. The hub will play a vital role in helping collaboration, support research, boosting innovation, maintaining jobs and making Mount Gambier one of the major centres for forestry research in the country. Look, I think together we need to think of ways to make the forestry industry attractive to our young people as well. We need to be thinking outside of the box. You know, maybe we can organise curriculum-based competitions at our schools with cash prizes for YouTube video, and most important, of the Green Triangle that covers 6 million hectares. It's a vital conversation, and as your local member, I'd like to start the conversation. I believe in the forestry industry and what it's trying to achieve. The future of our community depends on it. We're releasing our forestry policy over the next few days, and I'm very pleased to announce that we're actually going to be releasing it right here in this region. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. We're going to open the bowling with our interrogators. We'll have one question each at this stage, unless you've got burning other ones. But just to one candidate's probably a good start, but if you feel you must ask all, go for it. Leon.
Thank you, Ross. Troy, this one's for you, and it's a party political one to start off with, if you don't mind. Because as an ex-Liberal member and now an independent, would you be willing to throw your weight behind the Labour Party should they meet your 4 non-negotiable conditions? Is that how serious you are about the local forestry industry as a whole?
Thanks, Leon. To answer that, I think there's more than just this policy and non-negotiables. So I'll be putting out a suite of policies, and I've already put out a cross-border commissioner policy. I've put out a $10 million sporting infrastructure fund policy. But the big one for me is a 10-year ban on fracking in the southeast, a policy that I developed within the Liberal Party and was adopted by the Liberal Party. That is a non-negotiable. The truth of the matter is I am a Liberal in many ways. I believe and have Liberal values in lower taxes, smaller government, personal liberties and personal responsibilities. So my tendency will always be to support the Liberal Party. In saying that, they still need to be held to account on these non-negotiables that if they weren't going to come to the party, we'd need to have some serious discussions around that. But I'm indicating to the group that my first preference would be to the Liberal Party. But it might be a situation that they don't need my vote. It's not a hung parliament. But going forward, the government of the day needs support on certain legislation. And they would come and talk to you and negotiate about certain legislation. And then these conditions come into the fray of that negotiating. So I'm being very upfront and honest. I'm putting everything on the table. This is what I'm expecting. And we will see what the cards say at the March 17 election.
Alan.
Yeah, got a question for both Greg and Kate, and to some extent this applies to Craig Marsh as well, but I'll tackle Craig a bit later on, I think. But both Greg and Kate have said, look, our party hasn't come up with policy yet regarding the forestry industry. It's coming up, I think, next week. You guys live in the forestry hub of South Australia. In fact, the forestry hub of Australia, as was mentioned by Ross, surely you should be driving policy in your parties and you should know what your party needs to put in place in terms of policy and actually making that happen. So I was a bit disappointed that you didn't tell us tonight what those key policy things are that you will be pushing within your party to be written into the policy for the coming election.
Thanks for that. Okay, so we're very fortunate that at AFPA we actually get to directly have input into our policy, and Tracy and I have been working very hard on this. And I've got a little bit of a sneak peek. I have done some bits and pieces, obviously to answer the questions, but we wanted to make this a very strong policy. This is a very important industry, if not the most important industry down here. So we're working very hard on that.
I'll respond to that is that to have good input and to have good research, good understanding of what's happening, bearing in mind that I was only nominated a bit over a week ago, that if we're going to have good policy, you've got to have good thoughts. We can all have thought bubbles and we can put out policy, but if they're not thought through, not backed up, not budgeted, then in reality, they're a waste of time. So I would say to you that the reason that we've gone for a policy in week 3 is because that's how serious we take the forestry industry. We want to put the time and effort in to make sure that our policy is workable, believable, and we can get further information. So that's my response to that.
Thanks all. And so there's obviously we've got much more terrain to cover before March the 17th, as you just heard. They're the opening statements and the opening bowling. What we will do now is talk about growing domestic manufacturing. If you've looked at the policy document, you'll see, if you're looking at the blocks, you'll probably think, well, several of those really fall under this general idea that is enunciated in the document of the need to focus on growing the domestic manufacturing businesses in this part of the world. And so the question, and the candidates have had these questions to have a bit of a think about today, by the way, and so they know what's coming. So our first question, and think about your own input. If anyone wants to, after we've had the answers, do put your hands up and I'll try to get to you. We're asking you all, and again, Kate, we're going to start at your end of the table at this one. With the right policy settings, South Australia could double the economic value of the domestic timber manufacturing sector by 2050. That's what we believe. If elected, will you commit to this target? And will you develop a domestic manufacturing first policy, and what would that look like? So, Kate Amorosi.
Thank you. Yes, look, absolutely, SA Best supports this. We absolutely need to ensure initiatives are put in place to support the continued growth of the forest industries right across the supply chain. We need to include a stronger focus on forestry supply chain industry clusters. This is important for helping to create more jobs and increase productivity, resulting in growth of our regions and our economy.
Thanks very much. Greg.
This plan is an aspirational target. I think an aspirational target needs to have some meat put on the bones. And by that, I mean we need to have some serious planning. If we're going to put something together, my background's project management, it's one thing to say you're going to do something, which I applaud the industry for having that foresight and putting that together. Now we need to really get serious, list what needs to happen for that to be achieved, and more than that, we need to ensure that we have milestones, year 1, year 2, year 5, year 10, to ensure that we're on target and on track. And so we need to ensure that that these things are actually achievable. We also need to make sure it fits in with the plan of the whole southeast. Because if we have one plan off to one side, these need to be dovetailed together. Water management, our viticulture. So we need to make sure that that all competing interests are well served and well looked after. And so, but commitment to manufacturing and improving the product or developing new products, 100%. We, the Australian Conservatives, support that wholeheartedly. We want to see innovation, and even in the industry that I'm involved in the building industry, I believe there's much more ways that timber could be used, so we need to explore these things. But first and foremost, we actually need milestones. We need to ensure that we have a pathway. Is really important, and as I said before, we're interested not only just in the plan, but a plan that is charted. So that it goes on. Not just this election, not next election, but continually matches the 2050 deadline.
Thanks. Okay, Greg. Craig?
A Marshall Liberal government will unlock new economic activity in our region by injecting $150 million over the next 10 years to support employment growth in the region through our Regional Growth Fund. Now, look, I think this is a great plan, but I think 32 years away, it's probably actually quite conservative to say only doubling over 32 years. We've put in place this fund, Regional Growth Fund, to promote jobs and to promote this sort of plan into the future. I think there's lots of opportunities in this document that we can see this actually being quite easy to achieve. Now, we believe that the need exists for a long-term economic strategy for Mount Gambier, and so the forestry industry is a major component of that. So, yeah, look, I think with our Regional Growth Fund and other initiatives that we've got, this is quite achievable.
Thanks, Craig. I do have a follow-up. Sorry, Troy, before you do. So, Craig, did you just announce that there would be, if the Marshall government was elected, a long-term economic strategy for Mount Gambier?
Well, it's something that we will look into, yes, definitely.
Okay.
To one of the whole region, and in fact,
Alan?
the Mount Gambier City Council has got a strategy for the future of Mount Gambier. Why reinvent the wheel?
Why reinvent the wheel? Well, we'd probably look into that as well, what the council has come up with. But look, Mount Gambier has fallen behind. We've been neglected for so long, right? If we are elected, right, we will look at ways of improving this economy and improving jobs. We've got many policies for the regions in place, and we want to be able to be elected to put those policies into fruition.
Troy?
Thank you, Ross. Quite frankly, to have a manufacturing base, you've got to have three things pretty well right. Your three biggest inputs are power, wages and cost of raw material, and also access to that raw material. That's why I launched yesterday the number one item on mine is biomass, because with biomass you can actually get the price of power down, and that goes straight into manufacturing to lower the overheads for a manufacturing business to be able to compete with the log price or the export price on wood fibre. And I don't know if people know or not, but we export $3.5 billion worth of wood fibre out of Australia, and we import $5.5 billion worth of wood product back in. So that's a $2 billion deficit in the wrong way. That $2 billion could be here in Mount Gambier or in other places around Australia, but here is a key cornerstone for manufacturing. There's $2 billion to play with there that we're importing into Australia. Now, I'm not saying we'll get that to zero, but it's not a bad start. The other thing we need to do to achieve this target, and of course I commit to it, is actually work with the federal government. The federal government put out a document called the Key Industry Asks for a National Forestry Industry Plan. And I just want to read out comments by the Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, on the 12th of September 2017. Tonight, I'm pleased to announce I'm requesting Assistant Minister Anne Ruston, who's in the audience with us tonight, to help us develop a new government plan that will underpin growth in renewable timber and wood fibre industry, and work with a new government plan to give you, the vision and certainty you need. We are committed to developing this industry as a growth engine for regional Australia. So combined, I think we can achieve that target.
Thanks, Troy. Alan?
Troy, I applaud the focus on biomass, but are you aware of the fact that this current state government has actually committed, well, it's not millions of dollars, but hundreds of thousands of dollars anyway, towards looking at feasibility studies for individual companies who are interested in biomass developments, particularly in this region. It's administered by RDA Limestone Coast, and we're successfully getting quite a number of Limestone Coast businesses into the biomass area with feasibility, pre-feasibility studies, and in a couple of cases, full feasibility studies. So it's already happening.
To a degree, I agree with that, Alan, but, you know, there's been a fair bit of time where this has been going on. We need the impotence, and we need the 20 million on the table so that companies will commit to partnering with the outcome of that study. And I have spoken to a few people about where that biomass feasibility study is up to, and the reports haven't come back in any glowing terms that we're close to the end. So I think we need to make that a focus. I applaud the work that's being done, but this impotence of $1 million, I want to see it get done quicker or sooner rather than later, so that we can get moving this, get the price of power down for our manufacturers, and get this industry cranked up where it needs to be.
So we have kind of drifted into question 2 a little bit, the energy side of things, which is okay. It's a malleable business, a debate like this. But I did want to make sure we'd round it out and make sure anyone from the audience wanted to ask about that initial point about a commitment to double the economic value of the domestic timber manufacturing sector by 2050. I think I'm summarising correctly to say we had a commitment to that from Troy, and our other 3 candidates, correct me if I'm wrong, support it as a laudable goal, but we don't have a commitment to as such. So, you know, throw yourself into the fray if I'm misrepresenting the position. But that's how I see it. Do we have a question at the back? It's an excellent question, and it comes up very soon. So you're quite right. It's one of the key barriers. If we're going to grow the industry, we're going to have to address it. So, but if it's okay, we'll come back to it when we get to that point. Otherwise, we will really lose our thread. Do our interrogators have any more questions on this first question about the domestic growth of the industry? And candidates, Greg, did you want to say something else? I'll come back to you, Craig.
I'd like to clarify the fact that, yes,
please.
Of course, we're fully supportive of making the plan work. Now, you guys have put a lot of work in to this thus far and see that as achievable. As government, we'll do everything possible to ensure that that plan can be achieved, you know, in a practical way to get the outcomes that we're together. We're all in this together to make it work.
Thanks, Greg, for that clarity. And Craig, I think you're on the mic.
Well, I'd say with the policy settings we have in place, royalties for the region, which is a $750 million fund over 10 years for infrastructure and roads, and our regional growth fund, we are committed to this plan because both those policies, both those mechanisms, this plan falls into those policies. So yes, we're committed.
Well, that's great news as well.
Ross, one thing the candidates didn't talk about
lower,
was...
Alan. Just put the mic down a bit lower.
One thing the candidates didn't talk about was the possibility of, if you like, mandating that governments do build a certain proportion of their stock, whether it be housing for disadvantaged people or whether it be their own buildings that they use for accommodating their public servants, out of timber. We now have technology where timber can be used to build multi-storey buildings, as has been proven by Lend-Lease building, I think, an 11-storey building in Melbourne using largely timber components. So can we get some sort of commitment from the candidates that they would be pushing for this to happen in South Australia? And
again, these are great questions or interventions, but it's being passed the ball at the goal line when I'm back at the quarter mark. So that's it. We kind of come to that exactly. It's really important as well. Why don't we move into the energy space? We've sort of got into it and we've spun back, but we'll leave the domestic processing side there and go to question 2, candidates, which is really about our energy crisis nationally and certainly in this part of the world. As I'm sure you know, as you visit businesses in this part of the world, they're telling you that their energy costs have skyrocketed. And we have member companies who are paying 200% more in terms of energy than they were just a year or two ago. So it is absolutely vital that we solve this for our industry if we're going to get growth here. As you'd be aware, it's one of the major input costs for any of the businesses here. So I know we've already touched on it in terms of bioenergy and biomass, so we're going to come to that again. We see that, as you know from our document, as a major potential for this part of the world, and we wanted to know, as you know, because we gave you these documents a while back, we wanted to know what your thoughts were on those, and then we'll come to the audience and the panel again. But I think Kate led off last time, so Greg, could you please lead off with an answer to that one, the question about energy costs and bioenergy particularly?
Well, as you'd be aware, the Australian Conservatives, Corey Bernardi is probably one of the most vocal in regards to the price of power and the need for that to come down, and also the use of, not being have an ideology necessary, but looking at all power. So baseload power is critical. And that's the problem we've got. Manufacturing happens 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, not when the wind blows or the sun shines. And so, unfortunately, the South Australian Labor government might be on the cutting edge of technology when it comes to the green energy, but it's left manufacturing and most South Australians on the bleeding edge. So we need to get that balance back. And this seems as a wonderful opportunity. I know it happens in Sweden and happens in Finland and happens with, so there is technology out there that can certainly be adapted. Now, it's a matter of understanding all the constraints that we might have in this country, but working through them and knocking those constraints out step by step by step so that we can have biomass. It seems crazy to me that we're actually not only just exporting saw logs, we're also exporting potential energy. So I think this is a wonderful initiative and something that we need to look into. And depending on the method that's used, we also get a good byproduct in biochar, which can be used in agriculture. So we could actually complement other irrigation industries. Biochar is also shown to actually reduce water usage by water retention in the soils, which means that we could potentially grow more trees, because if we could cut the water use by agriculture by 20%, so instead of having a 6 to 1 hectare ratio when you're growing a crop, drop that to a 4 to 1, and then we've got 20% more water to use in the industry.
Greg, a quick follow-up to you. You can ask, I don't know if you'd be giving away too many secrets. Is there a fund coming in the policy that's coming from your party in relation to forestry? Is there a fund or something in bioenergy?
There's certainly in the bioenergy side of things, because as you'll be aware, the Australian Conservatives have been very concerned about the cost of power and been very vocal federally and at a state level. And so that will be definitely in the policy.
And Leon?
Just a quick question on bioenergy. The words I didn't hear was a feasibility study,
Sure.
which I think should be the first step. And from that, one can go into a plan to get results. Many people talk about bioenergy.
Sure.
But are you thinking, is that in your planning as a first step, feasibility study?
I think that we need to do a feasibility study of application of what already existing technology in the southeast. Not necessarily a feasibility study from scratch, but actually applying known technologies and making them happen in the southeast. There'll be impediments and there'll be differences. So we need to assess them, we need to work through them, we need to plan around them, and we need to eliminate them to make it happen.
Thanks. Craig?
Well, the Liberal Party has a strong plan to bring down electricity prices. Our Energy Solutions Plan, what we're talking about there is building an interconnector between New South Wales. $200 million fund will be put in place for that, right, to be able to tap into cheaper electricity from the eastern seaboard, but also be able to export our renewables when those prices are cheap and sell them over to the eastern seaboard and tap into Snowy 2.0 over there. So we think we can bring down electricity prices by 15% with that actually Energy Solutions Plan that we've our policy that we've got in place there. But to go back to biomass, right? I agree with Troy. We need a feasibility study, and there's been a few, Ellen has said, already done in this region, right? We've got so much product in this, in our forests that could go into a biomass plant. But what we also need to be thinking about is there's other industries that could utilise the heat offtake from a biomass plant, and we've got a burgeoning horticulture industry just over our border with McKillop, over in Tantanoola there, that could use the carbon dioxide that comes off the biomass as well. Right, so there's many opportunities in our region where you can have like symbiotic relationships between different industries with a biomass plant. So I think it's something that we should definitely look into. It when industries can get together on one of these biomass plants, it really brings down the price of the electricity that's created by that plant.
Thanks. Troy?
Thanks, Ross. And again, lots of theorising and not many hard commitments on the ground at the moment. So the reason why I like biomass more than most others is it's actually much greater than just getting the electricity prices down. That is, of course, a very important one. But Sustainability Victoria did a market summary, and they've reported that there's 500,000 tonne of wood waste in Melbourne. 80% of that at the moment goes to landfill. So that's 340,000 tonne available to bring back to the southeast. Believe it or not, 40% of every truck that leaves here fully loaded comes back empty. That's a huge cost to the transport industry. If we could have facilities in Melbourne, Bendigo, Adelaide, etc., that every truck that's coming back is fully backloaded, it will reduce the transport cost by 25%. So not only do we have a manufacturing base here burgeoning from cheaper power, not only do we have an end-to-end cycle and a great story to tell that we grow the plantation forest, we manufacture it here, and the wood products stay here and get generated into electricity to then keep that cycle going. We support the transport industry by being able to bring every load back to Mount Gambier as a backload from these facilities. Now, that also supports, the transport industry, but it really value adds to our region, and we'll see our transport sector start growing as well. So very, very important that every other candidate makes this commitment, because if I label them like I have, that is my number one commitment. It's actually so important that if we go to the key industry asks from the National Forest Industry Plan again, it's in here. In fact, so the federal government is looking to commit money to biomass. And if you want to, grab this document and have a read of it.
So, Troy, if I can have a follow-up. When you talk about your non-negotiable position, you've got other areas that you mentioned, we'll leave those aside, but in terms of the document you released about forestry, you've got the feasibility study in there, and obviously you have to do the feasibility study to know whether to proceed. So, but you also got the $20 million fund to develop the facility. So how do those two things work when you're negotiating with, if you are in a position and you're negotiating with an incoming minority government?
Well, it's one thing to put money up for a feasibility study, and companies will look at that and say, well, that's nice, we'll partner with you and we'll undertake that. But you get much greater buy-in if there's a fund, a $20 million biomass fund committed, not needing to go through Parliament, which all things can happen, trust me, I've seen it. There's a solid commitment. I think what this industry is really crying out for is certainty. So what I'm providing here is certainty. If you partner with us and do the feasibility study, I give you certainty that there's a $20 million fund there to partner with you to build this plant.
Thank you.
How can you do that, Troy, when whatever happens in terms of your election, being elected, you're not going to be in government?
No, that's like I said before, Alan, there's two ways that this will play out. One is the balance of power or a small collective. I think this will be an unusual election, and I can't predict what's going to happen. If I sat here and said I could, I'd be lying to you. But I'm reasonably sure if I look at the polls, neither the Liberals will form government in their own right, nor Labor will form government in their own right. Now, that's just my assumption. So it's going to come down to a independent or a small band of independents who stick together and have non-negotiables ready to go. But if that doesn't happen, remember Palmer United? We came in with a group, pretty solid group. Well, that lasted about 6 months before Jackie Lambie, Lazarus, all disintegrated off from that group, because in politics you've actually got to have discipline. And so there might be a period of time where it doesn't start out being a balance of power, but quickly does. And the third one is any legislation that needs to get through, the government of the day is always seeking support.
Kate.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I actually, as you all know, I'm new to politics, but I can't believe that we haven't had a bio plant down here or bioenergy down here. I've been speaking to some of the forestry guys, and some of the waste and stuff that we have can quite easily get put into it. We're all for renewables, and I think it's time that we completely, we swap over to that and use the bio. Look, SA Best is committed to a renewables future that provides affordable, reliable, quality and secure power. This is going to create jobs, bring the power prices down, residents and the environment. SA Best has a vision for a renewable energy future that provides for affordable, reliable, quality and secure power that is good for jobs, business, residents and the environment. We also support maximising local industry participation in renewables. The benefits of the boom in renewable energy investment must be maximised in South Australia to ensure the greatest extent of local industry participation, including building our research and development capacity. Procurement rules should reflect this in order to maximise the economic and employment potential to this sector to South Australia and encourage strong flow-on benefits through local manufacturing. Biomass is something I'm very, very strong on.
Thanks, Kate. So we're sort of rounding out the energy side of the program. Has anyone from the audience got any burning questions, can I put it that way, on bioenergy or any other energy related?
What was that last bit?
Where are you going to go when Liddell and the other coal-fired power station in New South Wales are closed? They're proposing to close 2 in the short term.
The Internet Connector fund's $200 million. All right. Now Queensland, where has fairly cheap energy as well. Queensland energy goes into New South Wales. Currently, we've only got an interconnector with Victoria, so that energy comes down through Queensland, New South Wales into Victoria, then back up to South Australia. So with us having an interconnector with New South Wales, we can also tap into Queensland. But the Snowy 2.0 scheme, right, that energy will be stored when energy's fairly cheap. So when our renewables are pumping out quite cheap energy, we can actually sell it back to New South Wales, store it in Snowy 2.0 and then buy it back later, right? So even though what you've just said about those power stations closing down, right, there's other sources of energy out there. Now, one thing, while I've got a chance, is that the Labor Party came out with their 75% renewable target, right? Nothing was in that about forestry. Now, forestry is a renewable. Forestry captures carbon from the atmosphere. Why aren't we looking at changing the legislation to put forestry into renewables?
Any other comments on energy or bioenergy? I know, side note, Brad, who to?
Look, the CFMU has been a strong advocate for a biomass plant here in the southeast for a number of years, probably 15, 20 years. So we've had 2 projects that have almost got to fruition, and I hear about all these feasibility studies. You know, there are a number of feasibility studies. It is a go, let me tell you. So without government funding, we've had a number of superannuation funds that have been prepared to spend their own money, $1 million on feasibility studies but we always seem to meet a roadblock. Like 4 or 5 years ago, we had a project that was almost ready to go, and then the Abbott government came into power and knocked on the Renewable Energy Fund, which scared away that particular project. Just late last year, we had 5 superannuation funds ready to go. We went and met with the government because we needed to get some sort of a commitment on supply contracts, only to be told that the supply contracts were all full for the next 5 years. So hence, you know, that fell over. So there seems to me to be a disunity amongst this issue. And I'm hearing things that I haven't never ever heard before. I haven't spoken to regional development or the rest of it. So what can you do to bring the industry together? Because unfortunately with this industry, you know, most people back the horse called self-interest, and it's fractured. And until this industry becomes united and gets together, we are going to be playing second fiddle to other forestry areas and other states, because I'll be honest with you, the union, we're currently in discussions to have that same proposal that we took to Adelaide in Victoria.
Thanks, Brad. I reckon that's open to anyone. Greg?
I agree. What you said before, there's plenty of research even overseas. So what needs to be identified is how we actually achieve that. You know, here in the southeast, that's number one. Now, I'm not aware that work's exactly being done, as you pointed out, getting all parties to work together. Now, how do we get all parties to work together? We're going to get all parties to work together when the government gets back on the bus and starts to lead with some of these initiatives and actually put structure in place. What's happened is, as you said, we've backed the horse of self-interest, so without a solid plan, and a plan that's, you know, set in legislation as a charter, then and the rules are set, until that happens, then a lot of these things will be fragmented. Not just the production of energy. It'll be in manufacturing and in making in new products. So we need to everybody needs to get on the same page and row the boat together.
Troy?
Thanks, Brad. And I think in this document, which is why it is such a very good document, and I agree with you, it is a fragmented industry, no doubt about it. Trust me, I see different sides and get told different stories from each sector, and they don't always marry up. In fact, they never marry up. But what's interesting about this document is every sector's almost covered in there in terms of what they would like to see the industry grow. So you've got the growers wanting to plant more and grow the estate. You've got the manufacturers wanting to manufacture more. And get their cost of power down. So I actually think, and I follow up with Greg, I totally agree. We've had a forest minister who I don't think has led. I think we've had a government that really hasn't been interested. Once the forests were sold, the old adage was, well, it's now a corporate entity and I don't have to have any responsibility for forest because it's all now corporate players. This document is actually quite powerful when used correctly, to bring everybody to the table and say, these are the things that we need to see line up to get this industry back on track.
Greg? And then...
Just in final, and that's one of the reasons the question was asked before about the Conservatives and how come we haven't released a policy as yet, because we actually believe this policy needs real close scrutiny and a lot of understanding, and I'm certain there'll be a lot more questions coming the industry's way before the policy is released.
Craig?
Yeah, look, I think this document does show that the industry is starting to work together. There's all facets of the industry in this document. And we've also got the processors getting together here in Mount Gambier. Right, so I think the industry, after a long time of being disjointed, is starting to look at getting together and working together to achieve all this, this building blocks of growth. And now, what I talked about before about us looking into making forestry part of the renewable target, right? At the moment, we're looking at ways of putting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Why aren't we looking at ways of actually taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere? So increasing our forests would be one way of going about that. So, using more of the products from our forests to build, right, will capture that carbon for a long period of time into the future.
Thanks all. Phil, we go to the audience, then back to you, Leon.
Question to Craig. You look at this industry and this region, would not a bio plant offer more to this region as far as opportunities, jobs, getting on-time thinnings in the forest than spending money on an interconnector and relying on another state for power?
So, a pretty specific question. Everyone hear it? Craig.
It's a hard one to answer. Look, I think an interconnector as well as a biomass plant would be a great idea. We need to really secure our energy in this state, right? And if we're creating a lot of renewables in this state, at the moment we're up to 50%, and they're variable, right? Sometimes we've got plenty of renewables, sometimes we've got barely any. So having an interconnector with New South Wales will give us that security. We can actually sell that energy over there, and we can also buy back cheaper energy from there. Now, I'm not sure how big a biomass plant you're talking about, but I doubt we're going to be able to build one that's big enough to secure out the whole state's energy, right? You're talking maybe 50, 100 megawatt plant. And in most cases, they're about 50. So, that's not enough to secure the energy for the entire state.
Leon, and then...
Sorry, it's one for Craig as well. Craig, you and I spoke about 2 weeks ago about a long-term plan for the industry. But, I mean, if you read the newspapers, or if you can trust them, but if you read the newspapers... All forestry role players, I mean, the growers, the processors, a couple of politicians say that the domestic timber industry is doing the best it has been for the past 15 years. We read it every day. We hear it on the radio and television. So yes, I think we are working together better. But, so what are the real problems then? If we agree that for the past 15 years, we're at a high point now, and that comes from processors, growers, and politicians. What exactly is the problem? Is it such a large-scale problem that it's, worth jumping on the bandwagon for?
Well, I think the industry's actually, because it's picked up after quite a lull. Well, when our forest was sold, 5 years ago, there was huge job losses through the region, right? And as it's picked up, as we've seen this sort of uplift in activity, and a lot of that's been driven by an uplift in housing construction, especially on the eastern seaboard. Right, we've actually seen skill shortages in our region because of those job losses all those years ago. So we need mechanisms in place, and the Liberal Party does have a mechanism in place to spend $100 million over the next 4 years to put over 20,000 apprentices and traineeships. It's across the state. It's not just for our industry here, but our industry will be able to tap into those apprentices and traineeships, so to further our skill set. For our region, for our forestry industry.
Thanks. Troy.
Leon, can I just put a different take on it? The problem is China. That's the problem. And the reason why China is a problem is because it's not an equal playing field. They have different standards in terms of health and safety. They have different environmental protection standards. And quite frankly, it's not an even playing field. So we're asking manufacturers here to compete with a country that has a different standard, and it's not, as I said, equal. In fact, just last year, China introduced a nature forest protection project, which means that they are locking up their domestic supply of timber. All right, so their supply volume is getting smaller. They also dropped the value-added tax from 13% to 11%. So as an importer of log, you used to pay 13%. Now, as of July last year, you pay 11%. So automatically, you've got more money to play with, which means you can pay more for the imported log coming through. Manufacturers tell me they can't compete with that. So that's where, and I don't blame the growers. I mean, the growers are running their businesses as they should be, and they are exporting at a price. So that's where the industry is really coming, apart. And you've got the Canada pine beetle. You've got America's housing starting to boom again. So they're using more of their wood. So New Zealand and Australia are pretty easy pickings for China in terms of wanting wood product. We are competing with China.
All right, we will keep moving at this point because we do have a couple more bundled questions to get through before we call it a night. So we were really going to talk now about the advisory council idea. That's the top really building block of our stack of blocks, and the notion of having something permanent that's intersecting with state government permanently around the growth of the industry. And dovetailed into that, we were going to talk about wood encouragement policies, which came up, I think Alan raised it earlier, and certainly Richard, as I mentioned earlier, has got one of the 16 councils in Australia that now has a wood encouragement policy, and one state, Tasmania, has a wood encouragement policy where they prioritise using Tasmanian timber, by the way, for anything that the government gets involved in building. So the question really is, would you support the creation of a permanent council like that, something that has the minister involved permanently, leaving aside the details of how regularly it would meet, and also what do you think of these ideas of a state-based wood encouragement policy? And we are up to Craig in terms of the start now, aren't we?
Well, the Marshall Liberal government will work with industry to put the appropriate structure in place, right, for representation for the South Australian Forestry Council. Now, I believe that council will have representation from all parts of industry and meet 4 times a year. Is that right, David? Yeah, 4 times a year. Right. So yeah,
with the minister involved.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So if we form government, David Ridgway will be the minister that's consulting with that forestry council. So
then as well, the wood encouragement side of the question, any policy state?
Yeah. Well, okay. So as you said, Tasmania has a wood encouragement policy, right? And the Grant Council has a wood encouragement policy, and so does other councils in a region. We probably need, we as a state government, if we form government, need to look at that sort of a situation. We do have in place the industry advocate. Right, the industry advocate would look at procurement for government to use more wood product for government buildings and other forms of infrastructure. So that's probably all I can really say at that point.
We have a question before we go to Troy.
You've got the state government also being encouraged to use steel from Whyalla. How do they balance that?
Absolutely, I know. So there's going to be competition there, right? But look, as I said before, if we're looking at ways of actually capturing carbon, right? So it might actually turn out to be cheaper, right? If the right mechanisms are in place for us to use wood ahead of steel. Now, steel has got to be used in other it's a very strong product in building, but there's a lot of uses for wood, and there's a lot of things that the government builds too. So I think there's a way of those two products not having to compete. Yeah.
Troy.
Thanks, Ross. Of course, I support the implementation of the advisory committee, but I'll qualify my support. As we've talked about before, we do have a diverse industry with different levers and different motivations. So that membership of the committee would be very important to me, to see who is represented on the committee. The terms of reference would have to be clearly defined, and of course the outcomes published and known to all. But in general principle, yes, I do support it. In terms of procurement policies, well, Ian Nottingale is the person responsible for that, and he's done wonderful things by putting local content and a percentage as a weighting to procurement. If the job is, say, in Mount Gambier, and you are a local, you get a 15% loading on the application if you can do that by being local. It's a way of encouraging local participation in those projects. That would be great to see something like that, but we've got to be careful that we don't break any procurement rules and cross-border procurement rules, because although we think we're pretty big at 1.4 million people, just sitting over our border is 6 million people. So you'd hate to discourage or set up a competitive environment where there's unfair advantage to South Australia, which broke the rules, and then you cut yourself out of a population base of 6 million. The other thing that I did was I went and brushed some dust off the cellulose fibre value chain study. I don't know if anyone's read it, but if you are not sleeping well at night, perhaps it's a good thing. But pathway 2, it was just interesting. It jumped out at me, glued laminated timber or glulam. And one of the dot points in here was the building codes should be modified to permit and promote the use of glulam products in large construction such as municipal buildings. Also, research the acceptability of radiator pine pulpwood-based glulam products to the Japanese market. So some of this work has already been done. We've just got to revisit it and get serious about it.
Richard, while the microphone's going down, Richard Sage, I don't know, question without notice, do you know how this policy is working so far for your council area?
Probably not as good as it could be. If you look at everybody that comes in and gets a building application, they're encouraged to look at local manufacturers, whether it's local plumbers or builders or whether it's the timber encouragement. I think as a community we need to look further at the use of timber. As was stated earlier, the building codes changed. We do a lot taller buildings now. The monasteries are starting to get up around the 8 stories. I think there's opportunities for new types of manufacturing of land timber to meet those needs.
We worked in the last year or so in Adelaide with the council and the government around their carbon neutral Adelaide idea, and pretty much explained to them that it would require timber buildings to do that seriously. So if we had a policy change that actually acknowledged the carbon that we sequester in timber in part of the construction design and costs, or as Richard was just saying, in that checklist that people go through, then I think we'd probably start to see some of this wonderful mid-rise timber buildings really starting to go forward in Adelaide. But we're still only halfway through our panel on that question. I'll remind you, Kate, because it's now the microphone's back to you, that we're asking about this idea of a permanently established advisory group with the minister involved, and also the wood encouragement policy.
Look, I can't shed too much light on this apart from saying yes in principle. We definitely agree and support these initiatives, but we'll be speaking more about that when we release the policy over the next couple of weeks.
And Greg?
Yes, the advisory panel for sure. We would probably like to take it one stage further with our decentralisation policy, and that would be to look seriously at relocating at least part of the forestry department to where it should be, where the forests are, and actually bring the people that are in the industry in contact with the people that are actually working the industry. So the wood encouragement policy.
I think, Greg, you've got an intervention on that one before you get to wood encouragement.
Oh, sorry, this is a question potentially for all candidates. South Australia led the way with a ban on plastic bags and shopping bags and so forth. We've now got a huge issue with the fact that China's not taking our plastic products or plastic waste, not just plastic bags, but bottles and cartons and so forth. We used to have paper bags when we went shopping, and you can make drink containers out of paperboard or fibreboard. What about state government being bold and legislating for the use of paper bags in shopping, and maybe legislating that certain drink containers should be made out of products that come from the timber industry.
Just hold on to that for your answer about wood encouragement. I think that people were interested, though, in your idea about moving the department to Mount Gambier, so...
I think that,
or a part of the department, not to
that's right. Not necessarily. To have more active and engagement with the people that are actually doing the work down here. I think it's essential. And I know I'm jumping topic a little bit here, but even the importance of R&D. Now, this does tie in.
Greg, sorry to hold you up, but I do want to be absolutely clear because it may make the news tomorrow. Is there a policy to move part of the department to make that a negotiation?
It's part of the Australian Conservatives' charter, if you like, to decentralise as much as practically possible. So that would be one thing we'd like to see, and I'm sure it will be part of the policy that, not the entire department, of course, but we need to have more operatives and down in this area.
Thank you for that. So you also were picking up the wood encouragement side of things, and
okay, the wood encouragement side of things. I was going to say, I think that wood has enough of its own quality to stand in its own way, but at the same time, as a personal example, I'm currently constructing a project, nearly a replica of what I did 30 years ago. 30 years ago, in those buildings, we used a lot more timber. In fact, I pulled timber down and stacked it and strapped it together. That's going to be recycled and used in another place. Or if Troy's idea, it probably could be used for bio energy. But the reality is that the new sheds are all steel and steel construction. Why? Obviously cost comes into it, but one of the things that when we put steel in our environment, pigs, we get a lot of corrosion. And so it's one of the topics I've been discussing with the owners recently. Gee, why aren't we using more timber? But you go and try to find information on the timber and how we could utilise it. There's some real work to be done there. And it is used widely in the US in our industry. So I would like to see, as the gentleman pointed out there before, exactly right. We put a policy in, encouragement here. Whaler want one with steel, and I don't know, someone might want one for concrete too. But at the end of the day, we really need to ensure that the products that we've got here can actually hold a place in industry on their own 2 feet.
All right.
The US, they use a product called Scrimber, I'm told. Do you know anything about that?
We could spend quite a long time here, but we must go on because we are a bit behind schedule. I think, though, Mount Gambier, you have some certainty that you're going to have some sort of guiding leadership group at a state government level from what we're hearing here tonight. I think that's at least one likely outcome out of the election, although noting comments about terms of reference and membership and so on, but the body. Do you have a burning desire to say something, Greg? Because we do have to keep cracking. Okay. Yeah, so we're moving on. We're really talking now about infrastructure, plantation development, water. I think it was you, sir, up the back, natural resources and so on. We need, obviously, investment in infrastructure. The plan, the industries in this part of the world talked about what would be a reasonable figure to ask a state government, an incoming state government, and indeed candidates for this area to be effectively demanding is earmarked for this area, and you know what those numbers are in the plan. And also, in terms of the fibre resource for the southeast, I'm sure you're all aware that we're about 170 or 75,000 hectares, but it's going backwards at a rate of knots. It's not standing still anymore. It's going backwards largely because as areas are harvested and they don't have water licences, they're not being replanted. So it's not really the way you want to set up a growth strategy for sawmilling. I say that. So we know that that's a complicated issue, and we've talked to the candidates about it. And so we'll ask for answers on this broadly, this idea about the broader plantation base for the industry and also the infrastructure that's needed to maintain the industry here. We must be back to Troy, I believe.
Thank you, Ross. And again, if in this next one, in terms of infrastructure and developing plantations, of course, from a grower's point of view, very important, because to grow the estate, more wood product that can go through to be manufactured. If you go to the key industry asks again, this is a great one to partner with the federal government, because they've got a target there of 400,000 hectares of new trees in the right places. And some of the initiatives in here, I think, are brilliant. I couldn't rewrite them myself any better. But earmarking $100 million from the Emissions Reduction Fund over the next 4 years for plantation forestry projects, establish low-interest loan mechanisms for plantation establishment, establish additional carbon-related financing programs, including carbon pricing mechanisms and purchasing of the rights to store carbon, enhance incentives for investment in plantations by the broader investment sector, including institutional investors and the industry super fund. And then you go to 100,000 acres of new farm forestry plantation, which I've spoken with Willie about, that very excited about, and providing initial funding of 700,000 for a collaborative industry-run forest, industries and agriculture cross-sector strategy to deliver integrated farm forestry programs. There's a lot in here that the work's been done. We've just got to get serious about it and start doing it. In terms of locally, of course, we have some issues. People in the hundreds, if they've got a water licence, can sit on it, or they might lease it out for 5 or 10 years. Well, forests don't grow in 5 or 10 years. We need 30-year certainty with some of this stuff. So there's a lot of work that has already been done, and I'd be partnering with the federal government on this.
Yep, why not? Yes, Craig.
The Marshall Liberal government will put on hold any further cuts to water allocations in the southeast. We want to base a review on science, not on ideology, right? So we want to put together an economic assessment, which will be the key aspect of our water allocation plan, right? We want to make sure that the science is right before we put in place a plan for how water is allocated in our region, right? And then getting on to infrastructure, and this is also part of the question.
Yes, yep.
Now, I've already touched on 2 funds that we're going to put in place. Royalties for the regions, which will be, we're going to take 30% of all mining royalties from around the state and apportion it put it into a fund which we believe that will grow to about 750 million over a 10-year period. Now that can be utilised in this document, right, for for the infrastructure part of this document, which I think is about 40 million over 4 years, right? And we've also, I've touched on it before too, our regional growth fund, which is 150 million over 10 years, right?
When
so
you
we've
say,
already got the.
sorry to interrupt, Craig. So when you say that it can be utilised, are you saying that you will be dedicating it to the southeast?
Yeah, good question. Well, of course, it'll be a competitive process with those funds. Yes. So look, but our region, right, is a substantial part of South Australia's regional economy, right? So a big chunk of both of those funds will end up here in the southeast. Yes.
Alan?
Can you promise that the money will be allocated purely on objective economic analysis, or will politics come into it?
Well, I believe objective economic analysis would be the appropriate mechanism there, Alan. Thank you.
Greg? Thanks, Craig.
Again, I know it's been announced a couple of times about the Liberal and even the SA Best royalties for regions, but that's a Rob Brokenshire idea from about 2000, and I think it's 9 years he's been pushing for that. So we're particularly delighted that comes into play, and we really do need to use that to strengthen our industries and get things happening back in the regions. But of course, the elephant in the room is the water. You know, there's no getting away from that, and that is something that really needs to be looked at very, very carefully. I mean, we need to go back and go through the science. We need to, and we all know, we get two experts in a room. One thing we get is a pretty decent argument sometimes. So what we really need is we need the experts, we need their knowledge, but then we need the collective wisdom of the people of South Australia and the South East and the people that are actually involved in the industries to work through so we get a proper outcome. Anything less, we're doing ourselves an injustice. It is a finite resource, unfortunately. It'd be lovely if it wasn't. But even some of the things we talked about today, just again, shows the importance of R&D. Having for example, a centre of cooperative research in the southeast, so that we can not only look at manufactured product, we can actually look at how we grow the trees. Look at as I said before, biochar. I don't know exactly how much it can add to agriculture, but it might, as I said, drop the ratio of growing a crop of potatoes from 6 to 1 to 4 to 1, and then all of a sudden we've got more water to be utilised. So all these things need to be tied together. We need a holistic approach because the water's too important and our forest industry is too important.
Laurie, question without notice to you. How many hectares do you think we're going to lose from the plantation estate of South Australia as these licences bite and companies make decisions not to replant?
Well, Ross, the current water policy will see a reduction of about 25,000 hectares.
So what's that number again?
About
25,000 hectares.
The areas of coals short. There is, and of course that current WAP is currently under review, and some of the early work from that review is indicating or questioning the level of drawdown or water uptake of extraction by trees. There was a view that trees didn't extract beyond the 6 metre level. There is some thought now that it could be depths greater than that, possibly even up to 12 metres. If that is indeed the case, that would see very large-scale forced reduction in plantation area.
If they applied the same
same logic of methodology.
Do you think, I guess anyone in the panel or even our interrogators could comment on this? Do you think it was understood in Parliament House in Adelaide what the impact would be on forest industries as this regime was rolled out?
Sorry, we didn't hear over this side.
Didn't hear the answer? Okay. 25,000, yeah, got everything was really about that, and it could be worse if the same methods are applied and different science prevails. And I had the follow-up that I just wondered whether when this policy was being rolled out, whether policymakers really understood the devastating effect it would have. Yeah, well, maybe David, what you're being thrown the talking stick?
I'm sure they didn't understand.
So it is a major problem for us. Greg, had you finished? Yep. Kate.
Okay, look, I think this is a huge issue. Whilst there is a strong integrated approach to managing natural resources, the current system has been largely unsatisfactory. SABS believes funding and administration arrangements for NRM delivery in South Australia needs to be completely overhauled and focus returned to delivering real results on the ground. We need our NRM system to work, and it needs to be based on strong scientific evidence. We need to get this right. We need to not lose this to over the border to Victoria and keep our forests strong here.
I think the thing we need to understand about science-based policy making is it really depends on your point of view which science you choose. We deal with this all around Australia, and if someone's prioritising an environmental outcome that is an extreme environmental outcome, if I can put it that way, you can find science that will prevent almost any activity in rural Australia. And there is a real question for us here, probably for whoever ends up leading the community in terms of the work in Adelaide about how we, and indeed in MacKillop as well, how we manage to bring a sensible outcome together here. If everyone's right, and you can hark back now, we're on the last question, so if you've thought of something you wished you'd asked earlier, you can do it right now as you are about to. We're in the last stages, folks. Yep.
This is a question about the water issue. One of the issues that the forest industry have grappled with for a long time is that there's really only about 6 companies in the whole region that are involved in forestry. There's a lot of small growers, but the majority of the forest is six companies. There are hundreds of irrigators in the region. So this is a political issue. And it's the issue that you raised before about the science. And that's the issue that the forest industry is really angry about what's happened over the last 10 years, because you're dead right. Science is implicated by, or is affected by the politics. So how will the candidates, I don't really mind who answers the question, look at the forest industry fairly compared with the interests of the hundreds of irrigators that influence government?
Troy, you want to have a crack at that?
I think that's some work the industry needs to do. You need to get the science, get the evidence and present it. Then I think you need to start a promotional campaign actually telling the forest side of the story, because you're right, this is a two-pronged attack. One, you need the science. Two, you need the will of the public or the public opinion on your side. If the industry sits back, and I'll say now, if you're looking for me to do that, I won't be doing it. That's the industry needs to do that. So show me the science. I'm more than happy to go and fight and go into bat. But it's more than just the science. It's actually a PR campaign now too, because this has got a head of steam, and you're right. From a political point of view, there are competing interests here. So I think the industry has to do some work in this field, and I'm not backwards in coming forward and saying it. But if you're serious about growing the estates and getting a change to the water allocation plans, that's where the work's got to be done.
Greg, I'll come to you in a sec, but as I say, Troy, what you're really referring to is perhaps something like the document there that AFPA's produced to help the federal government work out what policy measures, what options we think are before them to get us that 400,000 hectares. So you're saying you're given the footy, you'll run. Greg?
That's what I said before. I think it's not just a question of science. I mean, we need the knowledge and the expert's opinion for sure. And as I said, we're going to get a diverse outcomes at times, as we said before, depending on the way the research has been done and what the interest of the research is. But this is also, we don't want to be pitting irrigators against forestry. We need to avoid that. You know, we're a community down here. We don't want a situation like we got in up in Warwick and those sorts of areas where we've got farmers pitting themselves against farmers because one likes gas and one doesn't want gas. So we need to be working this together. So as I said before, we've got very sandy soils here. Irrigators use a lot of water to grow a crop. So it needs to be a two-pronged attack. We need to be looking at not only just what forestry needs, but also how we can reduce the water but not reduce the output in those other industries. So it's having a holistic approach, it's having a full plan, it's having a irrigation plan that dovetails with the forestry plan. Otherwise, we end up in conflict, and that's not good for communities and not good for the southeast. Full stop.
All right, shall we, Craig? Yep.
Well, I really don't have much more to add, because I think they're both right in this respect, that the industry must look into that. Like it's got to sell itself. It's got to say, you know, what importance it has to our area. Look, one thing is that forests do lower the evaporation. They cut down the amount of wind, so they're quite beneficial to farming land. And one thing that I've heard talked about is after Ash Wednesday, when so much of our forest disappeared, that the water table rose back up, and a lot of the swamps had a lot of water back in them. Right, so the forests have actually been able to lower the water table and actually give us a lot more agricultural land in the region. So there's that relationship between agriculture and the forestry.
Tony.
Ross, this is the critical issue of the evening. We heard from Laurie that there's a very real risk that the forest estate will decrease in size. Even if our forest estate maintains its current hectare reach, in terms of the processes in the region, they're all chasing scale. So in real terms, Staying still is going backwards. What you heard from Laurie is on this question, there's a risk that we might lose 15 to 20%. I, quite frankly, want to hear this evening from each of the candidates about whether they will stand up for forestry on this question, bearing in mind that there are thousands of water licences issued to irrigators in this electorate, and that, quite frankly, if you ask this industry to go to bat against a loaded deck like that, we will have the outcome we had in 2010. So let's not skip over this issue. Let's have clear and concise answers. Will you stand up in the face of what will be populist opinion amongst irrigators in the agricultural sector to support forestry and the processing sector in Mount Gambier?
Well, there's the challenge panel, and we've gone around. I don't think we have to spend too long explaining the issue anymore, but who would like to take that on?
I'll be brave. The reality is that what Tony's just outlined is true. But this is where strong leadership comes and having good plans and good economic outcomes. I think what we really need to understand is that what is the return at forestry? What is the potential for forestry, for forest? I mean, the water under the ground is for everybody to use and for everybody's benefit. It's not necessarily just for farmers and irrigators or for forest industry. We all have ownership in that. So we need to actually look at that resource and actually do an economic evaluation, how, what does it do and what does return to the community as a whole.
Craig.
Look, I think the forestry industry is so important to this area that we have to look at what you just said. I've already said that the Marshall Liberal government will put on hold these cuts to water allegations, right? I think the industry needs that certainty. And it is such an important industry to this region.
Yeah, I totally agree. And part of the reason why the cuts, the halting, I should say, of the cuts by David Spears is because I've gone to him with a few issues around allocations. But it's a two-way street, Tony. You have to stand up as a federal member as well, because when this issue comes to a head, we've got to be united. I still say the industry has to do more in providing the science that sits behind it, get it out there and promote it. And I think one of the fantastic ways that plantations can expand is that collaboration between the forest industry and farmers. And it's in this document of providing funds for farmers to be planting forests on their farms. It may be 4 or 5 deep, however many hectares. It won't be the same intensive planting that we're used to, but it's around that collaboration between the two industries going forward. So it's already identified in this document at 100,000 hectares for new forestry plantings on farms. I think that's a fantastic initiative to push forward with.
Kate?
It's not just the science either, it's also the economic, we need to be able to, as Troy said, we need the science from forestry, but we also need the economics and what that means in the economic impact so that we all can be on the same page.
Just want to make sure Kate gets a chance at the talking stick.
Look, I think we just need to take it all, look at all the scientific proof, and come up with something that's going to be certainly for our forestry and keep our forestry here.
One question up there, and then we're going to have to. Yeah, I just wanted to add, like what you said about forests and farmers together. Well, having forests on farming land, it's going to lower evaporation, but also forests put a lot more moisture back into the atmosphere too. So it can have the added effect of increasing rainfall.
There's a question to Greg and Kate, although Troy and Craig can answer if they wish. Greg and Kate, you've seen where this industry has got to in the last 16 years under a state Labor government. Do you think this industry would be best served by a Labor or a Labor coalition government into the future, or do you think we should have a fresh start in this state?
So, Greg and Kate. Greg's got the microphone. No, you...
I think that obviously, I think we do need a fresh start. We need a whole new way of thinking. We need to break the me first sort of mentality. You know, we've seen that time and time again, and we need to start working better as a community, and that starts with Adelaide understanding what the regional areas need. We can see that there is, in essence, pork barrelling across the board, and so we really do need a clean start. We need really strong leadership, people that are prepared to stand up and, you know, at the end of the day, really put policy forward, and a principled policy, clear principled policy.
What, is that a clear answer to your question?
Sort of, but I'll wait for the other answers.
For obviously being a Conservative, it's we would like to see a Liberal government moving forward.
I think that's your clear answer. Kate, we are running out of time now.
Question, am I allowed to take this one on notice, please, and get back to you? Thank you.
Thanks, panel, we've run out of time. What I want to do is just have a 1 minute summary statement. We'll go for one more question. Mark, I think it was it? Yes. This really have to be the last one, and then Sarah will have 1 minute each to wrap up.
This question is open to all candidates if you would like to answer. I'm asking this on behalf of taxpayers. AFPA has proposed a plan to boost investment in the state forestry sector, asking for $77 million in taxpayers' funds. One of the organisations supporting the plan is 141. It has been reported by the ATO that 141 paid no corporate tax in 2015-16. OFO 141 is 50% owned by Australia's Future Fund, which in its 2015-16 annual report indicated it received strong returns from 41 investment.
Okay, Mark.
So on one side of the coin,
I'm going to take the role of the Speaker
Public Affairs
in Parliament House. They turn the microphone off.
Then on the other side, we have 141 being able to arrange affairs so that it pays no corporate tax, but delivers strong returns for its owners.
You can ask about
my question is, regardless of the pros and cons of the plan, do you think this financial hypocrisy undermines the case to receive taxpayers' funds?
As Tony Jones would say, we'll take that as a statement. We can chat about it later, Mark. I'm sorry to cut you off, but really it really is not about a specific company tonight, it's about a whole industry. And you did pretty well, as Tony would have said, the Speaker of the Parliament, in using at least one little tiny way to get it into the context, but it didn't quite work. We really only have time for just 1 minute statements from each of you to close off the evening, and then we'll thank you properly. And we'll go back to you, Troy, to start at this end of the table.
Well, thank you, Ross. Very enjoyable night tonight. I guess the takeaway message is I have non-negotiables. You know what they are. I've publicised them. I've put them out ahead of time before this meeting, enabled people to have question and answer on my non-negotiables, written down, firm commitment to you that if I hold the balance of power, or if I have to do negotiating with the government of the day, these are the things that I want to deliver for this region. The rest, talk big numbers over 10 years. When you break it down per year and you think about it for the whole state, with no guarantee that it's going to land here, I think the choice is pretty clear. Thank you.
Thanks, Troy. Craig.
Today I spent the day with Senator Anne Ruston, and Anne came to Mount Gambier to announce the National Institute of Forest Products Innovation Hub, right? And so that'll be set up here in Mount Gambier for the next 4 years. Now, I think that's the way, right, that we can actually stop exports to China by innovating in our forestry industry, right? Now, the Liberal Party, the State Liberal Party, as I mentioned tonight, we've got a suite of policies that can be utilised by this plan to see to see this building blocks of growth to fruition. So, you know, I think those two mechanisms there, the state government and this National Institute for Forestry Products that Anne has come here to announce, will be those mechanisms that will see this growth come.
Thanks, Craig. Greg.
Got me going. The Australian Conservatives will release their comprehensive forestry policy after careful consideration and thought, and even views that came from here tonight. So I want to say that first. But more importantly, we need to stay together as a community. We can't let these sort of issues divide us. We need a strong plan. We need a strong plan for our contractors who are often highly geared to provide the services, the trucks on the road. We can't afford a valley in the middle of all this, and because these guys are putting their homes up. They're really invested. So we need to consider all those issues, and when we move forward, we also need to look at infrastructure planning. As it turns out, we've got an airport that's going to be upgraded, which may well mean that we can now use larger water bombers in terms of putting out fires and bushfire control. So we need to work together, all together, to make this happen, and for South Australia and the South East in particular to prosper.
Thanks. Kate.
Okay, all I can say is I very much look forward to releasing our policy in the next couple of weeks. I think you'll be very, very impressed with it. Thank you.
Thanks to you all, and I think it's terrific to know that there's much more forest industry politics coming at us. Please fill in your first ballot paper for this state election. It's right on your chairs there, and it'll be helpful for us to know for our media who you think won the debate. I think we've got a bit more to do. As you heard, there's 2 more major policies coming, so you can rely on us to use those to make an informed judgment for you about the plan and who's meeting it. Please thank our interrogators from the Muppets up in the balconies, Alan and Leon. And of course, I don't know how many of you want to swap places with these folks. I think they did an amazing job. It is tough as doing this sort of thing, but they're putting themselves forward because they love the community and they think that they'd like to serve the community. So each of them deserves our applause. And goodbye to everyone on Facebook Live, wherever you are in the world. I'm sure they're watching this all over the world. Thank you for being here tonight. Good night, everyone.